Welcome, everyone, to the Week 15 edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast. Of course, we're looking at the playoffs, if you are celebrating that right now, getting you set from the waiver wire perspective for how that might look like for folks, and who are the top options. Isaac Guerendo was the league winner and possibly playoff qualifier for a lot of folks last week. Is there a free agent that can do that this week? Spoiler, probably not. But Jim Coventry will get you set alongside myself, Joe Bartel, as we get started for the Week 15 waiver wire show. Again, welcome everyone to the Tuesday, December 10th edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Joe Bartel. You can follow me at JB Fantasy Sports. Alongside me, not always, but it feels like in heart at least, is Jim Coventry. We've done a number of shows now throughout the weeks. We do the weekly rankings / NFL game previews on the RotoWire YouTube channel. Jim's been awesome. We've done a fantastic, it feels like you and I are at least doing a show twice a week, 3 times a week. We did the Vegas Maserati show in the SiriusXM studios there to start the fantasy season. What better way to cap off the fantasy season, or at least for a few folks entering the fantasy playoffs, to be with my guy, Jim Coventry. You can follow me at Jim Coventry NFL on Twitter, and Jim's filling in for Jake, who is on a rendezvous in Chicago. It's like we did a 1-for-1 trade. I know Jake isn't going to listen to this, so we definitely won that trade, getting Jim in office, sending Jake back to Chicago. Winners for the RotoWire in-office crew. Jim, it's awesome to be with you today.
Excited to be here. Just ready for the NFL fantasy playoffs, the NFL playoffs down the road. Let's get rolling.
So for a lot of folks who might not be familiar, Jim Coventry does the early waiver wire article for us on RotoWire Fantasy Football on the website itself. You obviously do a few YouTube videos as well too. So you might not be familiar with what we do per se on this, but we've kind of given the breakdown. So Jake and I always start out with the top 5 must-add waivers for both of us. And typically I say, hey, Jake, go ahead and run through your top 5. I'll go through my 5. I think our list is pretty close, kind of because I might have copied your list a little bit when I was looking at the site itself. Jim, who are your top 5 waiver wire pickups this week?
Yeah, Patrick Taylor, and we'll talk about, I'm sure, later. Ray McLeod, Kendrick Bourne, Bub Means, and then Isaiah Davis. Could go anywhere on this list. These could be anywhere 1 to 5.
All right, so for the listener's perspective, Patrick Taylor, now running back for the 49ers, will start there first. He actually is number 3 or 4 on my list, depending on how we do the hierarchy, but it doesn't really matter. We need to know the stats of Isaac Guerendo because he was the waiver wire pickup darling last week. Ended up more than paying off. I think I saw in one of the Reddit posts a number of weeks ago, every single fantasy analyst was wrong on Dontavian Wicks. Remember that one week when every single fantasy analyst would say, pick up Dontavian Wicks? Well, don't let them make the same mistake with Guerendo. And it's like, no, situation is different. Isaac Guerendo actually is in a pretty good spot. The Niners typically use their running backs. Lo and behold, he went nuclear. And of course, the Niners have a fantastic first half against the Bears, who did not show up. The dead cat head coach bounce did not apply to Chicago, of course. And then Guerendo gets hurt. So do we know the status yet of Guerendo or what we're expecting to start next week?
Obviously, those who listen to this later, we're recording at about 1 o'clock Eastern on Tuesday. It's a Thursday game. It's a sprained foot per Kyle Shanahan. If he has a sprained foot and it's a Thursday game, I would say the probability of Guerendo playing is less than 30%. I could be wrong. I'm not a doctor. I'm not in the house. But I think it's very unlikely he plays on a short week with a sprained foot.
Yeah, and that's then going to lead us to Patrick Taylor, who is already, we mentioned last week, in deeper formats as your PPR back for the 49ers. Now, I think it's worth mentioning, and Mario Puig and I, we do the SiriusXM show, Channel 87, every Friday. We had talked about Israel Abanikanda, who I like a lot as a talent perspective, too. Obviously, he was I think a day 3 pick for the Jets 2 years ago, got cut because the Jets are dumb in the front office, took 2 more running backs this past offseason. Isaiah Davis, who we'll talk about in the show, actually ended up being good. Braylon Allen did not. Stupid Jets doing stupid things. But Abanikanda is really fast, doesn't have a whole lot of wiggle elsewhere. It kind of reminds you of Isaac Guerendo in that sense, but I think Guerendo is a type of athlete and has a different repertoire from a running back spot. So you're saying Patrick Taylor over Israel Abanikanda if, in fact, we're going to see Guerendo not play Thursday?
This is what's important to know. And can I be wrong on this? Yes. But Patrick Taylor knows the offense. It sounds dumb, but it means a lot if you know what the offense is and you know the plays, you know where the different gaps are going to be. The Shanahan system is a little specific. Abanikanda hasn't been in that system. Some players you can plug and play. Sometimes it happens. I don't know that he has enough practice time. And again, we're probably without Trent Williams, the left tackle again, the left guard, Aaron Banks both out 2 weeks in a row. You need to know the system because you're not going to get a lot of help from the offensive line here. Taylor can pass protect, which means he's going to be on passing downs. That's a big advantage as well.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. And if we're saying what's the way to beat the Rams defense, well, everything. But certainly the passing attack and Brock Purdy, I think you have the advantage for Patrick Taylor. So next on your list, I believe, was Raymond McLeod, right?
Yeah, Ray McLeod has been very interesting. I drafted him in a lot of leagues, and I've kept him. PPR has been great all year, but he's a free agent in a lot of leagues. And look, we know he's not a great player. It doesn't matter. He's getting targets. He plays over 90% of the snaps all season. He's on the field. And what we've seen recently is Kirk Cousins, because of his inability to move, you got to get the ball out quickly. And if you notice, even Drake London's success, a lot of it's been when he's moved to the slot and they're throwing in the middle. Well, where does Ray McLeod live? In the middle of the field. Therefore, we have seen him go 95 and 98 yards in the last 2 games. His targets in the last 3, 6, 6, and 11. If you're in a PPR league and you need a floor play, and I know the buys are over, but if you're in a little deeper of a league, yeah, Ray McLeod has a floor.
Yeah, that's one of the things we should have celebrated. No more buys. Hopefully you made it to the playoffs. You didn't have to have your first round of the playoffs with the bye weeks going on. But you're right. I think that's certainly an option. I actually listed Demario Douglas as like my number 4 or 5 pickup this week as a PPR guy. The other one I want to say is Josh Palmer, depending on the status of Ladd McConkey. Obviously, I think we shouldn't, we in the industry, you and I or whatever, at least myself, we shouldn't have been surprised that a guy dealing with a knee sprain and a shoulder sprain wouldn't be able to play. But it came as a bit of a surprise that Ladd McConkey was out against the Chiefs on Sunday night. I don't want people to get caught off guard again, because the idea is it's Quentin Johnston, the draft pick, capital invested in him last year. He's at 43% rostered. We saw last Sunday it was the Chiefs, and Josh Palmer was the guy getting them most of the intermediate targets. And now Will Dissly is going to be out for some sort of time too. So if McConkey doesn't play, is Josh Palmer an even better option over Raymond McLeod?
So here's what's interesting. The Chiefs, about a month ago, they lost Jalen Watts at a corner, right? Well, there's been a ripple effect over the passing weeks. The Chiefs cannot defend the perimeter right now at all. You saw Bryce Young shred them on the outside with David Moore. You've seen the Raiders shred them on the outside. It was no surprise that when Justin Herbert had to throw somewhere, he was able to find Josh Palmer all day long because, again, the Chiefs simply cannot cover the perimeter. So Palmer's fine enough as a play because he's going to get targets. But to see what last week and how he looked, it really was a big byproduct of the opponent they faced. But again, if you need them and there's no McConkey, somebody's getting the targets. And why not Josh Palmer?
Yeah, again, against the Buccaneers defense this week, we've seen them just get victimized in every single situation. Even the Raiders looked fantastic from a passing perspective against this Buccaneers team. It also, if the Chargers had J.K. Dobbins, we always talk about the path of least resistance. You have a lot of your phrases that are very uniquely good and fantastic. Mine, I always default to is, what is the team's path of least resistance to win? They would want to win the game by just running with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards 30 times. It does not matter the Buccaneers give up a ton to the passing game. Their least path of resistance is the rushing attack. Well, Dobbins isn't there. And we've seen now 2 difficult weeks. Game script-wise was weird against the Falcons. The Chiefs' defense is pretty good. I guess they've been sort of bad over the past month against the run, but they shut down Gus Edwards and Vidal. I'm saying the path of least resistance cannot be the rushing attack anymore. And that's why Josh Palmer, to me, elevates even above a guy like Raymond McLeod from a PPR perspective if McConkey's out. We're doing the show Tuesday. The if is very, very critical with that. Who's number 3 on your waiver list again?
Yeah, number 3 is Kendrick Bourne of the New England Patriots. He's back from the ACL injury. His snaps have gone up in each of the last 3 weeks. He's been working him back. He had 35 snaps, 37, 43, 2 5-target games, at least 30 yards in each of those games. He has a 70-yard and a touchdown game. He is going to be probably coming out of the bye, probably a full-time outside receiver across from Kayshon Boutte. But what we've learned about Kendrick Bourne, he could get open. And getting open quickly with Drake May, they're already kind of getting a chemistry there. And I think the Patriots are going to trail in many games. And I think where he operates in the short to mid area of the field, those are places that can be attacked. So Kendrick Bourne could be a little nice PPR boost for you down the stretch as well.
Interesting. We had one of the you can pick whatever fantasy app or sports app update you want. We had one of the early in the morning notifications, and normally when I wake up and see notifications like, oh man, Saquon Barkley's out, or like some big injury. No, this notification was KJ Osborne and the Patriots have decided to mutually part ways, and I'm like, oh, thanks for pushing that one out, team. Like that's a really critical one, but not that KJ Osborne is doing anything. That's the whole point of the joke. It's more that any snaps more that can be diverted to Demario Douglas can be diverted to Kendrick Bourne, and for that passing attack for Drake May, which I still think he's played really well, and it goes underreported compared to Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix. I think Drake May is honestly possibly the QB outside Caleb Williams I still want. That Patriots offense has some options, and they're going to need to pass the ball too. So you're Kendrick Bourne. I'm Demario Douglas again from the PPR perspective. Raymond McLeod, Josh Palmer. If McConkey's out, that one adds to who's another one. At least one more name from this top 5 waiver list.
Yeah, I'm going to throw Bub Means out there. If you're in a deeper league and you're really scratching for a receiver, we thought he might come back from injured reserve last week. He's missed 6 weeks, 5 games. There's a bye week in there. It looks like he was close last week. They're playing the Commanders this week. If he comes back, look, I don't know if Jake Haener or Spencer Rattler's playing. If my inclination as of Tuesday would be Haener because Rattler got benched for him at the end of things. But either way, they're going to throw the ball some. And Bub Means, they have nobody at receiver. Hopefully they get Olave back. But Bub Means, 5 for 45 and a touchdown, 3 for 37. Those were his last 2 full games. Then the game he got injured, he had 1 target, 12 snaps, caught a 36-yard pass. He's had production, and he really came on. And so with him being like one of the only games in town for a team that's probably going to trail and no Taysom Hill to take away a lot of looks for the rest of the offense, again, Bub Means, if you're in a deep league, he could help you.
Yeah, it's the quarterback situation that makes things frustrating, but it's a lot like the Devon Vele times with the Broncos where, hey, you can do a whole lot worse in a full point PPR than basically a floor of 10 points, which was what Vele was getting for the Broncos. Bub Means might be the number 1 receiver for the Saints, and yeah, it's a bad passing attack, obviously, with a lesser quarterback play. I almost think that brings down Kamara as well, too, like just overall offensively, if you're saying bad quarterbacks. But we've seen junk time production plenty of times, and if you're still worried about the threat of MVS making a big touchdown play, well, then the underneath is wide open, right? I mean, that's just going to be there every single time. I had listed Juwan Johnson as my top 5 play or pickup last week. He ended up being really fantastic too. So you could make the argument Bub Means or Juwan Johnson or both if you are talking yourself into the Spencers or Jake Haeners of the world. Go ahead.
Yeah, and you know, I had something I lost. You mentioned a player, and I wanted to add something. And it's all right. It's if I come back to it, I'll mention it later.
Well, we were saying Kamara is going to have possibly a disappointing outcome.
Yeah. So defense is the way to stop Kamara in that offense is by putting a 5 or 6 man front. And now that the quarterback is going to be a downgrade from Derek Carr, teams are probably going to do that. But now I remember what I was exactly going to say. Marcus Valdes-Scantling, his stock just went way down. Because Derek Carr, with the rollouts and the play action, he is able to launch a deep pass this year. He's done that real well. I don't think we're getting that deep pass from Spencer Rattler and from Jake Haener. I think they're going to be more like underneath workers. So if you've been going into last week, 4 of Valdes-Scantling's 7 catches were touchdowns. Now last week he had 4 catches, I think, as well. But I think that those big touchdowns, I think those are probably not happening for him the rest of the way.
Well, and then obviously if Olave is back too, that would also take away that role entirely too for the Saints. So I had Isaiah Davis, running back for the Jets, the better rookie running back. Sorry, folks that were in on the Wisconsin Braylon Allen product, the better rookie running back. I had Isaiah Davis, number 1 on my waiver wire list. Talk me out of why he shouldn't be number 1 on this list. You had listed Patrick Taylor, for example, ahead of him. So why is Isaiah Davis not number 1?
Patrick Taylor potentially, if he's the only game in town, gets more volume. That's the only reason. Isaiah Davis and Braylon Allen were a complete split. And it worked out in the game. The game script was good. They weren't trailing. They were winning the game against the Dolphins. Mm-hmm. So they were able to control with the rushing attack. I think they had like 22 carries between he and Braylon Allen. They both were targeted in the pass game. Aaron Rodgers looked good for the first time in forever. If they trail in games, game script's going to get away from them. Once Rodgers is a front runner at this point, if they aren't leading, he's going to implode. So look, pick up Isaiah Davis. Definitely consider starting him if you need a running back. And he's a very good player. But that Jet situation, we saw Breece Hall not being able to do much in that offense this year. So I do get a little nervous about that. But he's a great pickup. He is a great pickup.
I always try to add one streaming option, whether it be quarterback or tight end, for a lot of folks that can matter, or at least you're kind of centralized on that. We do specific positional breakdowns after our top 5 waivers, but I always focus on trying to add at least one. I listed Bryce Young as a possible top 5 waiver wire pickup this week. Now, the good news is you mentioned front runner Aaron Rodgers. Well, he probably is going to front run against the Jacksonville Jaguars at Jacksonville. We'll have to kind of see, but otherwise, Bryce Young quietly been fantastic for the past month now from a fantasy perspective in much more difficult matchups than what he's going to face against the Cowboys this week. It's gross to absolutely think about, whether it be your fantasy playoff, semifinals, whatever it is, to throw Bryce Young out there in a must-win fantasy game. But I kind of think the Cowboys defense is just so irreparably broken that they're going to yield points no matter what, even if it is to Bryce Young, who, by the way, again, has looked pretty good over the past month.
You know, with DeMarion Overshown suffering a serious knee injury, and I don't know that DeMarcus Lawrence is coming back. They thought he would come back, and he hasn't been. So, look, I mean, it could work out here. Bryce Young has been able to get the ball to receivers, and people don't talk about it. That offensive line in Carolina, they've invested in that line over the last few years. That line is very good. They are very underrated. They protect him pretty darn well, and he has received. Look, Thielen gets open quickly. They've got options. So, yeah, I think that would be a good streamer. And if I'm looking at a streamer, look, I'm going to go back to the Jameis train if he's out there. Jameis Winston is playing Kansas City. I talked earlier. Kansas City cannot defend perimeter receivers. Hopefully, Cedric Tillman comes back. I hope he's feeling better. We'll see what happens there. Jerry Jeudy. Kansas City's not stopping anybody right now, and they're really not getting a pass rush, even though they have Chris Jones. And so that bad line in Cleveland may not be an issue. Yeah, I think that we could see Jameis do it again.
I like it. Okay, well, again, for our top 5 waiver wire list for both of us, you had mentioned Patrick Taylor. He was along my list, too. I'd said Isaiah Davis. We'll have to see the stats of Breece Hall. We're recording this early Tuesday. I have no idea if he plays. Obviously, if Breece Hall is available, that would hinder the Isaiah Davis or Braylon Allen aspect of things. We've mentioned a number of streaming PPR receivers, whether it be Bub Means, who could be activated off of injured reserve, Demario Douglas, Kendrick Bourne, Josh Palmer as well, if Lab McConkey's not out. I'll repeat the Juwan Johnson again, only 10% roster on Yahoo. And then the quarterbacks, Bryce Young, Aaron Rodgers, and I think Jameis Winston too. So we'll dive into the positional aspect. I think we've covered a lot of things here in the first 15 minutes of guys that you can look at. It's a pretty healthy waiver wire list despite entering the fantasy playoffs. And a reminder, you're not dealing with 12 other people potentially wanting these players. It's half the pool. So I think that's the idea, is you can kind of be situational for a lot of these things, provided people weren't being aggressive or planning ahead of time for their quarterbacks or defenses in particular. So any other note? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Those of you who have a bye this upcoming week, use the waiver wire to plan ahead for week 15. If you use a defense, look at a defense for streaming for week 15. Or 16. Week 16. I'm sorry. Look for 16. Look ahead. See if there's any situations. Basically, if you've got to get a direct backup for a running back, see if you can secure that now. But play right now for your championship preemptively if you have a bye.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's a fantastic call as well too. Let's take a word, at least a break here for our sponsors from Blue Wire. From the video perspective, we'll transition right through. But first word from Blue Wire. All right, we're back, and we go first to the quarterbacks. We've kind of already touched on a lot of the streamer guys out there, and again, the downside, it's really more of an upside. There are theoretically 6 teams left in each league at most, from maybe 7, I guess, if you're in a 14-team league and weird playoff stuff. 6 teams left. You're talking about 1 through 6, the quarterbacks. You really shouldn't have to stream quarterback at this point, but if you do need to, whether it be Aaron Rodgers, Bryce Young, Jameis Winston, all 3 are probably quality options. Is there a lean that you have in the case of Winston, Aaron Rodgers, or Bryce Young more than anybody else?
You know, when we're looking at these other quarterbacks, Kirk Cousins against the Raiders, we know Kirk Cousins' kryptonite is a pass rush. Well, we know Max Crosby's there, but the Raiders have not gotten a consistent rush this year. Now, Crosby gets up for a game like Kansas City. He wrecks it, but he hasn't been wrecking games this year. And when we look at the Raiders, Jacorian Bennett, their right corner, he's been on the injured reserve. Their slot corner, Nate Hobbs, has been out the last couple of weeks. I don't know if he's coming back. If this is a decimated secondary that wasn't good to start and their pass rush isn't good, that's a perfect recipe for – and the Raiders stopped the run pretty well. So it's not like Bijan's going to run all over them. So they're going to throw a little bit here. And so I think Kirk Cousins, this could be a good week for him.
Yeah, Kirk Cousins is great. But of the Aaron Rodgers, Bryce Young call, and also Winston too. So would you rank it Cousins and then Cousins and then Aaron Rodgers, Bryce Young, Jameis Winston, or is it Winston?
I got Winston, Cousins,
Oh, Winston's ahead of Cousins. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I got Winston ahead of Cousins by one spot.
Okay.
I have,
right,
I have Winston as my quarterback 18.
Man, I had talked about not wanting to roll into the fantasy playoffs with Bryce Young, of all people, against the Cowboys. The guy that's thrown 6 interceptions over the past 3 weeks or 2 weeks, or whatever it is, that he has to start your fantasy playoffs, that is a uncomfortable spot. But all the injuries that you outlined for the Raiders,
schedule.
That's fair. Yeah, that's
a bad schedule.
You could argue the Falcons have played their hardest opponents, the Chargers, obviously, and the Vikings over the past 2 weeks, and that battle for the NFC South crown has gotten closer. But both teams, Buccaneers and the Falcons, have kind of an easy schedule here to end the year.
Yes.
Yeah. And then Jake always does this, and I'm thinking more for like the Scott Fishbowl crowd, but also if you are in a super flex league or 2 quarterback streamers. We had some updates with that. You had Aiden O'Connell, unfortunately, suffered an injury that seems to keep him out for the rest of the year. Gardner Minshew also
knee
on
bruised.
injured reserve.
It's a knee bruised.
Oh, it's a knee bruise. So he's not. He's out this week, but he's not
off the table yet. This week is not off the table yet.
Really? Well, I just dropped him in one of my leagues.
The line was, if he can't go, then Desmond Ridder would, but they did not rule him out yet with a knee bruise. It's probably going to be pain management, probably more than anything.
Okay, so that frustrates things too. I wouldn't want to play Desmond Ridder anyway. Like there's a point of quarterback. No, I'm being serious. You're laughing.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
There's a point where the Jawan Johnsons and Josh Palmers and Kendrick Bournes of the world are just going to do more points than whatever quarterback 42 is, which is what we're discussing here with Desmond Ridder. So I don't really think it's an actionable thing anyway. I never want to step on Jake's toes when he's doing all this breakdown of these deep quarterback leagues. And you could make the case that even if Desmond Ridder plays awful, 14 points is probably better than most of these streaming receivers and tight ends we discuss anyway. But it's a difficult spot to be in. And then you had talked about, I had mentioned it as well, Derek Carr. That one we could say pretty safely done for the season, right?
Yes, broken left hand, and he can't take a snap. Now, if Jake Haener is the starter, what I want you to know is this. He has very good running ability. He could be that quarterback that gets you 40, 50 yards on the ground. He's not going to get that every game, but he has the ability to do that. He's very good. He will take off and run. When he played very limited snaps with Chris Olave before Olave's injury, he peppered him with targets. He's smart. Get the ball to Olave and good things kind of happen. So if Haener is going to start and you are in desperate dire straits, the running of Haener could potentially help you. And of course, look, Drew Lock's a terrible quarterback. If he's healthy enough to play, he's run for, over 50 yards in 2 games. He scored one. Garbage time guy. So, again, if you got to hold your nose, there's that.
Yeah, I don't actually mind the Drew Lock one, too, because the Malik Neighbors aspect where they're complaining and Brian Dable kind of coaching for his job, there's enough incentive. I mean, this is narrative, but you can do a narrative thing like, well, Locke has to, produce X, Y, and Z thing, and therefore will get you fantasy points. I like Locke if you're really dealing with that level of quarterback over the Ridders or even O'Connells, I guess, of that world too. Bone Bruise, that's good. Yeah, I dropped him on my leagues, but it's fine. I'm not going to be sweating losing Aiden O'Connell if he ends up playing. Let's move over to the running backs, and again, we've mentioned a few of them before. There's a hierarchy, and it's really dependent on who plays and who doesn't play. We're recording this today. Breece Hall status obviously matters for Isaiah Davis and Braylon Allen. Braylon Allen is at 54% rostered, so he would typically be above our status. I had also listed Gus Edwards, just being mindful he's at 58% rostered. I don't really want to play Gus Edwards against the Buccaneers, but there probably is going to be more points involved in that game. And then Isaac Guerrero at 8% rostered, far outside our range. If for whatever the reason he's still available in your 6-team league, maybe it's something, although he's now banged up too. So that Thursday game being the Rams-Niners comes into prominence because if Guerrero doesn't play, of course, McCaffrey on IR, Jordan Mason on IR, Elijah Mitchell never played start the year. We're talking about running back 4, 5, 6 for Patrick Taylor, and in this case, Israel Abanikanda. And you had talked about it, and I think it's great. Let's just rehash it. Taylor knows the offense, and that might matter on a short week.
Yeah, 100%. Like I said, he pass protects, which means he'll be part of the passing game. If Purdy has to dump the ball off, Taylor could get you some receptions. Taylor did run for 4.4 yards per carry on limited work at Green Bay last year. He's not a great running back, but he can play. He can play a bit. And volume's king in fantasy football. And if he gets those 12 touches, yeah, that's gold.
Ding, ding, ding. One of my favorite phrases. We have the bingo card out for Jim Coventry and the stuff. I always love it. It brings a smile to me every time. Okay, so I mentioned Breece Hall as well. If he doesn't play, of course, the Jets against Jacksonville this week, Isaiah Davis, Braylon Allen had a pretty 50-50 split in a favorable game script. Well, guess what? You'd assume, even though it's the Jets, you would assume that favorable game script again will occur against the Jaguars.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I don't really have a whole lot to add right now on that one. I was kind of looking ahead with how you were mentioning, but I agreed with what you said. Not much to add on that.
Oh, yeah, and we have to see the stats of Breece Hall. I like Isaiah Davis over Braylon Allen for what it's worth. Not that many people listening will also have a direct way to go through our conversation, but I thought Mario Puig and I covered it really, really well on last Friday's episode. The disparity difference in talent with Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis, and I'm sure you guys talked about too on the Saturday edition. So anywhere you can listen to SiriusXM, you go back to RotoWire Fantasy Football Channel 87. We get you covered on that, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Friday, and then obviously you guys on Saturday too. What, 2 to 4, or is that 1 to 4? 2
to 4 Eastern. So 2 to 4 Eastern. You know what was weird though with the Isaiah Davis and Breece Hall thing to me, though, and I knew the breakdown that both you and Murray did, and I loved it. I thought it was great. But the fact that Breece Hall was the guy all year behind Braylon Allen was behind Breece Hall all year, seeing all the work. So what did the coaches see? And that was my sticking point. It's like, well, if Isaiah Davis was so good, then why wasn't he in the role that Braylon Allen was in? And I was having a hard time processing that. And obviously they both played and they split the work and they both did fine. But that's what I found interesting. I get the breakdown, but why wouldn't the team have elevated him sooner? But you guys were ahead of the curve. You got it right. So hats off to you.
And I know I never will take credit for that. That's Mario. And Mario, and I want to put words in his mouth, Mario would say, it's because the Jets felt incentivized to what he would call make the meme of Braylon Allen be a reality, and therefore, we'll have the bludgeoning power guy. Oh, he looks big and strong. His quads are insane. He looks like A.J. Dillon, yada, yada. Like that. That's the meme that Mario is referring to, when in actuality, if you want to look successful and win football games, Isaiah Davis at least was the better player in that regard. I don't know that we're discussing so much about this without Breece Hall status makes things tricky, but it's one that you definitely need to monitor in the event that he doesn't play. Sincere McCormick is only at 15% roster. We had somebody in the chat also ask about that too, and I think he's emerged above the group that I want to highlight, especially in these waiver wire shows, because we've done McCormick now 2 consecutive weeks. But that one, I would actually feel more comfortable than even possibly Patrick Taylor, depending on what the Niners backfield would look like. We know Antonio Pierce loves McCormick. It seems like Zamir White just is going to be either not playing or phased out entirely if he is healthy. Alexander Madison has now been a limited participant 2 straight weeks, and they still kept him out. I think this is just trying to get McCormick the complete runway to be a difference maker for this offense, and he's looked pretty good, I think.
Hey, he's last year's Zamir White. You know what that means? Don't draft McCormick next year, but play him this year, right? So, I told people after the Kansas City game, I said, McCormick played well, and they have no reason to push Alexander Madison out there in the lead role, or if Zamir White, he was already relegated. Zamir White was anyway. So I thought after the Kansas City game, it was his job no matter who was healthy at that point. And then he comes back with another good game. So he has like 27 carries for 142 yards at 2 games for a running attack that was sputtering. So yeah, I agree with you. I thought last year's McCormick could be the lead back. There's no reason now to think they're turning back, because look, Madison might be using the receiving change of pace role. But I don't.
That's Amir Abdullah too. It's that those two are like more coinciding with each other.
Right. Madison, when healthy, though, would be the change of pace receiving back, I think, because he was getting a lot of targets earlier in the year. Abdullah would come in when the games were out of hand, which happens with the Raiders quite often, though. So there's that.
Yeah, somebody in the chat asks, and I think it's fair, has Sincere McCormick basically pushed out Zamir White and Alexander Madison to the back burner when both Madison and Zamir White are healthy? And I think the answer is at least Zamir White, and Madison might be now more relegated to the change of pace back out of that question.
Yeah, and I just had echoed the same thing. So, I just agreed with you on that, because that was my call after the Chiefs game. I said is kind of McCormick's backfield, I thought, at that point.
I have listed a bunch of the backup retreads, as I called them, the Ray Davis, Trey Benson, Blake Corum, Cam Akers, Jerome Ford, all guys that have some sort of playing time. If the starter were to go down, they immediately enter into basically Zach Charbonnet territory of insane fantasy value. We saw what Charbonnet did last week. We'll see if Kenneth Walker ends up playing this week, so Charbonnet would join that group. If this is an overall strategy question, Jim, entering the playoffs, and you're in a bunch of different playoff leagues, so you can be really qualified to do this. Would you rather have these backups, these basically golden tickets of sorts, as opposed to X, Y, and Z, Ray McLeod? Or does it matter now at this point to stack up a bunch of 10 to 12 PPR receivers and take those options away from fellow people? Or is it just analyzing your league and seeing what other people might do instead?
There's 3 weeks left. If you have a bye week, there are 2 weeks left, assuming you win. Right now, you look at your roster and you say, these are my starters. Do I have a replacement for one of the starters if they get hurt? Beyond that, load up with these players who could take over a job. Ray McLeod, if you know there's almost zero chance you're going to start him, you're better off taking that running back like Blake Corum, who now has 8 carries in 2 straight games after seeing hardly any all year. If Kyron Williams, and this has been the year of the running back staying healthy. I know Joe Mixon missed a little time, and now, pretty solid, but these running backs have largely stayed healthy. But that's no guarantee to happen. There's some big workloads here. It's been an anomaly year. So, yeah, grabbing a Blake Corum, grabbing a Trey Benson. O'Connor stays healthy for the first time in his career, but it's going to be the first time ever. But again, grab those guys, because if you're in the fantasy championship game and all of a sudden you did 2 things if you roster that player. Either you need to start him, you start him, or B, your opponent can't start him if he ends up being that bell cow for 1 week.
Oh, and here's the other part of this too is, okay, so I had to drop Blake Corum in one league because we have IR spots, but like George Pickens can go on IR. Yeah. So when you're trying to make a waiver wire pickup, Pickens is listed as questionable, even though it sounds like he's not going to play this week. That's not what the affiliate injury designations would be. So you have to have George Pickens elevate back to your roster. You have to drop 2 people or 1 people, whatever it is, instead. And in this case, I have to drop Blake Corum. I would love to pick up Corum again, but an opponent could pick up Corum. And even if they are out of the playoffs and I somehow keep advancing, and then Kyron Williams in week 17 is out for whatever the reason, it's not like Corum just goes back on the waiver wire. So you're forfeiting the chance at any duration during the playoffs, if somebody's smart, to take away that Corum piece, to take away on this golden ticket of the spot for running backs. I dare say that I would have my whole roster basically of the backup running back golden tickets out there, if at all possible. The Trey Bensons again, Blake Corum's of the world are a perfect example. I mean, Garendo would have been that great example last week and immediately entered into that case and made a fantasy relevant starter. So 2 other running backs I want to mention real quick before we take another break here. Kendre Miller got activated off injured reserve. We had talked about this on last week's show, and Jake made the case that new interim head coach for the Saints had said, well, Kendre Miller isn't in my doghouse. I don't know why Dennis Allen hated Kendre Miller so much, but I don't. And lo and behold, Kendre Miller comes in, scores a touchdown, looks pretty good, looks every bit the 3rd-round pick that they were supposed to be a couple of years ago. That's more outside of the golden ticket range of other guys like the Corums and Bensons, but Kendre Miller needs to be on, I think, a lot of people's lists in deeper formats.
Yeah, he's a flex, and he had played 25% of the snaps. Jamal Williams only played 7%, so it's a clear number 2 role here. Alvin Kamara, I mean, obviously the Saints are out of this thing, so at some point, you're not going to want to keep giving him every touch, and they're not going to do that. They didn't do that last week. So Kendre Miller will be involved. He had 10 carries last week, which that was a solid number. I don't know how many receiving opportunities he gets, but again, this team has shared red zone work all year. Taysom Hill was getting it, and now we saw Kendre Miller get pushed in by his teammates, which is a beautiful thing. The offensive lineman powered him into the end zone, but I do think he gets some red zone looks. But the count on him, again, you're in a deeper league, and you need somebody. And if Kamara goes down, but we liked Miller in the preseason. Miller in limited work last year, he showed ability to break tackles, gain yards after contact. He was a plus player, but the injuries. And so again, he is a player to stash because running backs, again, super valuable if they walk into a bigger role.
And the other golden ticket aspect is Sean Tucker now with Bucky Irving seemingly dealing with a million injuries, left last week's game, and probably cost a lot of folks from a fantasy perspective as well, too, with the back on Jim raising his hand on the broadcast here. Yeah, I think I got dunked on Bucky by one of them. My answer to all this is always, I never would have been in the fantasy playoff position if it wasn't for Bucky Irving in the 3 or 4 weeks prior, so that he didn't play 1 week, especially with all the injuries. That's on me and not on anyone else. I can't be frustrated in that. So we have Sean Tucker now in a spot where if the Buccaneers are smart, you'd stop having the workload be so dedicated to Bucky Irving and Rachaad White. The Buccaneers have 3 really good running backs, and they're acting like they only have 2. So if Bucky can't play again, was forced out of last week's game due to a back injury, I'm 32. I know that back injuries don't just go away at this point in my life, and I'd imagine even an athlete like Bucky Irving's caliber has to deal with the same thing. Sean Tucker is in that equation as well.
I was very disappointed at the usage after Bucky Irving went down. Irving didn't play long at all. He had 4 carries, he had a target, but he was not in the game much time. And then what happens? Rachaad White plays 76% of the snaps, and Sean Tucker plays 18% of the snaps. I thought it would be more like 60-40.
Right.
That now 3 carries, 47 yards, broke a long run. He proved he could do that. 192 yards on 17 touches, I think, against New Orleans in week 6. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But in theory, we should see more work from Sean Tucker. But before Bucky Irving took over the snaps in the prior 2 games from White was seeing 61% of the snaps or right around there. And the fact they upped him, grab Tucker, but be nervous, because that workload should not have reflected. That should have been a lot more work than Sean Tucker got in that game.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. All right, let's go to the receivers. And before we do so, a word from our sponsors. Nick Whalen, who I think continues to be one of the top in the Scott Fishbowl scoring points right now, and his breakdown for DraftKings Pick 6.
We're proud to be brought to you by DraftKings Pick 6. So many NFL offerings each week over at Pick 6. Been enjoying playing on the Pick 6 platform each and every week of the NFL season. Think a certain quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards. How about your favorite receiver scoring a touchdown? Check out Pick 6, the newest way to play fantasy football and win cash right now with DraftKings. Here's how it works. Just pick 2 to 6 players of the same sport and choose if they'll have more or less of a given stat. Yards, catches, touchdowns, etc. Lock in those picks and compete against opponents for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use our code ROTOPICK. That's ROTOPICK. Again, ROTOPICK, ROTOPICK. If you're a new Pick 6 customer, play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed. Just use that code, ROTOPICK. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-78-89-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
All right, we're back. And a reminder, a new season of LIV Golf Fantasy is coming in 2025. New prizes, new ways to win, and more are all up to date here in the new season. Get ready to play and sign up now at fantasy.livgolf.com. All right, receivers. We had talked about a bunch of different PPR dudes, Jim, and I think it's fair to mention the Bub Meanses of the world, the Kendrick Bournes. I had listed Demario Douglas in that equation, and then also obviously Ray McLeod is in that area too, and Sterling Shepard I think you had also on the article. So is there one of those that you like, if you had to pick of all 5, let's just say all 5 are available on waiver wires, is there one of these PPR dudes that you feel like I want in this week more than I would in any other one?
I mean, again, Ray McLeod is running hot right now, 95 and 98 yards. The target 6 and 11, I believe, in the middle of the field. Kirk Cousins having to get it out quickly for a PPR floor. That's your play. Ceiling, it's tough to call. Realistically, if Chris Olave's on your waiver wire because of the injured reserve, he doesn't have a spot in your league, he could come back this week. We don't know if he will. His spirits were apparently high when we talked. We don't know what that means. You definitely want to get him in if that happens. Sterling Shepard has been 6 or 7 targets, like 3 straight games. Again, not much of a ceiling, but he's been putting some yardage up here. They're all very week-to-week options, and really the matchups aren't even the thing because they're such secondary and tertiary players. It's not like the team's going to jam these players with targets. So basically at this point, you're looking for a lottery ticket, but that's why McLeod has the best floor of them. He's not going to get you a 0.
Yeah, I mentioned Josh Palmer as well, too, in the event that Ladd McConkey does not play. Knee sprain and shoulder sprain. He's had a lot of work put on him against this Buccaneers defense. I think Josh Palmer is an interesting one, too, and would be widely available. Somebody in the chat asked about Tim Patrick, and I didn't include him on the list because I didn't think anyone would need to consider Tim Patrick. Like, we're really, really, really diving down into it. But obviously, he's gotten a few more work, and he terrorized the Packers defense. Again, I'm 32. For almost 30 years of my life, the Packers defense has had no idea what to do with a receiver that's over 6'2" or 6'3". So Julio Jones, Calvin Johnson, Randy Moss. Oh my God, a tall receiver. Can't cover him. Oh, touchdown. Tim Patrick's not going against the Packers defense, thankfully, again this week. But is he an option as well for folks in super deep formats?
Tim Patrick's game was an anomaly on a few levels. First of all, he saw 7 targets. He's normally at 3 or 4 targets. That's pretty much the norm for him. Obviously, the red zone, good luck with it. You got Amon-Ra St. Brown. You got Sam Laporta. You got the 2 running backs. I want to remember their nicknames, Sonic and Knuckles.
Yeah, my 3-year-old loves that.
So the odds of Patrick getting a touchdown in that group are super small. And remember, his normal target base is 3 to 4. And if now this week, well, they're playing the Bills this week.
Yep.
So I mean, Bills play a lot of zone. It could be a shootout. So I guess if you needed a 1 week, it's possible 1 week Patrick could get it done, because if the game goes high enough scoring, it might not be where the Lions are grinding out the clock with their running backs. So if you needed to go desperation, again, just don't count on those 7 targets. That's not been the norm.
It's an abnormality to the level of Westbrook-Akine and Marquez Valdes-Scantling scoring touchdowns. And lo and behold, they didn't either case last week, and you probably caught the bag if you're starting either one of them. That's why I'd say Patrick is far below and wasn't really on my radar in terms of really deep receiver options, but it is worth mentioning. And then for your shallower leagues, technically Keon Coleman is under our 50% threshold. Romeo Doubs now down to 38% rostered in Yahoo. Cedric Tillman at 34%. So of those three, Keon Coleman, Romeo Doubs, Cedric Tillman have all missed multiple weeks due to injury. Is there one of those three that you like as a play this week if you have to?
Yeah, it's look, if Cedric Tillman gets cleared, it's Cedric Tillman. He is our downfield guy, and Jameis Winston likes to throw downfield. And he was playing at a good level. And I know in the last game before the injury, it was a tough defensive matchup and didn't quite work out, but he's going to get targets. So go with Tillman. If he's going to play, I really think Tillman, because we're going to see those. Remember, I said this earlier. Kansas City cannot cover outside receivers right now. They haven't been able to do it for weeks. And Winston's going to, even if the passer starts getting home, Winston's going to stare it down. Winston does not just get the ball out. He hangs on. And I believe it's a very, very good matchup for Winston. And so that means, obviously, we could see Tillman do well also.
Tillman's like a top 30 play for me this week if he gets cleared.
Yes.
I think that the volume is king. You mention all the time. I think that's absolutely going to be there in play for the Browns, and they will likely have to be play catch up. Although, if you're the Chiefs, whatever devil magic you do to make the game close and doink in a field goal off the upright 4 times to win, whatever, it's inevitable. KC is inevitable, as my Avengers movies would say. It feels like the tight end position. The tight end position is a little bit tricky. So again, we're talking about theoretically 6 teams, possibly 7 teams that are still left. You're playing your top 6 or 7 tight ends. Does Juwan Johnson fit into that equation now, though? Because that's 2 consecutive weeks where he has been at least a fantasy tight end 8 in full point PPR formats. We're talking about a downgrade at quarterback for the Saints, no matter who it be between Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener. If it's Haener, there's less passing volume because he could be eligible to run more. I'm a little bit nervous as somebody that streamed Juwan Johnson in a few flex spots. I don't know if I have that luxury this week.
Look, Juwan Johnson had a nightmare matchup last week. The Giants give up nothing to tight ends, and Juwan Johnson had a game. Juwan Johnson is a very, very good presence. He's a converted wide receiver, and he's very good in the middle of the field. And when pressure comes, your sight line is middle of the field. And I do think that whether it's Haener, whether it's Rattler, Juwan Johnson, with no Taysom Hill taking snaps away, because he obviously – Juwan Johnson's snap share was lower. Not that they play the same position, but they need bodies on the field, and Foster Moreau plays a lot. But no, I think you keep rolling PPR with Juwan Johnson, and because he is going to take care of that team. He's their best middle of the field option in the passing game right now.
Yeah, okay, well, that's good. And then if people missed this, Dallas Goedert was placed in injured reserve Friday, so Grant Calcaterra is your starting tight end. They do have, CJ Uzama as well, too, as like the veteran pass catcher for that group. I don't really want to go down to that level of Calcaterra, but he was actually okay in the few stints prior as the starter when Goddard was injured earlier this season.
Calcaterra had 3 matchups against the bottom 5 tight end defenses, and he got you about 8 to 10 PPR points in each of those. He had 1 game against a tough defense. I think he had 1 catch for 5 yards. So realistically, he got lucky with matchups. He's not going to have that level of easy matchups going forward. Try to avoid starting Calcaterra if you can. This week, A.J. Brown's hot. He's angry about the balls not coming out to the receivers. I don't think they're wasting throws to Calcaterra this week. I think they've got to figure out you've got to get the ball to these receivers at some point.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's a narrative one that I completely buy. I'm with you. Last tight end to mention, and this is about as deep of leagues as it get, but I wrote about this yesterday. Anywhere, I guess you're reading the notes or like the player pages, you can kind of see my analysis. But Will Dissly placed in injured reserve. Will Dissly is out for any number of weeks. He's listed as week to week. He will not play this week. You have Hayden Hurst on injured reserve. So now your third tight end for the Chargers offense is Stone Smart, an undrafted free agent from a couple of years ago. I always liken him to like the unnecessary roughness stone hands kind of guys where he wouldn't catch the ball at all. He's been more of a blocking specialist. Well, he enters after Disley gets injured last week against the Chiefs, has a pretty good fantasy day, and there really isn't anyone behind Stone Smart. We know the Chargers want to run the ball. They value Stone Smart's blocking. By default, he's going to play the majority of the snaps. And against this defense, against the Buccaneers this week, I don't mind him as like a top 16, top 14 play, but we're in the playoffs. Theoretically, you don't need to have a top 14 tight end left.
Just remember, the Chiefs are one of the 3 worst defenses in the league against tight ends. They give you the middle of the field. Those are Will Disley's yards. Now, don't take anything away from Stone Smart. He did well. Disley would have had those same catches if he was on the field. But Stone Smart last year, he was getting 1 to 3 targets from week 10 on. And the last 4 games, 3 for 15, 1 for 23, 2 for 23, and 2 for 14. That's what we had. But again, he had a beautiful matchup, and this is a one-dimensional team. They're not going to run the football anymore. They can't run the ball. No, everybody knows they can't run the football. So Stone Smart, maybe he does a little better than that. Maybe he can go about 3 catches for 35 yards, 15% chance of scoring a touchdown. I think that's about it.
Okay. All right. Well, again, I would take Stone Smart over Calcaterra, right? We're fine with that.
100%.
So I'd still want Juwan Johnson, who's 10% rostered in Yahoo leagues. I think you could probably get Juwan Johnson if you need it. Defensive streamers, and this one obviously matters now in the playoffs. I had listed Cardinals against the Patriots, Broncos against the Colts, and then Falcons against Vegas, and Bengals against the Titans. Those last 2, Falcons against the Raiders, possibly starting Aidan O'Connell, possibly Desmond Ridder. What a revenge game if that was the case, Ridder against the Falcons. They have the Giants the following week too. So if you could stomach playing the Falcons defense, which hasn't been very good, you get 2 consecutive weeks where they have good matchups. And then the Bengals, yes, I know the Bengals of all teams, they have the Titans this week. We know how bad they are. And then the Browns, who have Winston going over turnover potential all the time. I don't know if I like that one so much, but obviously if you're in like turnover only leagues, Bengals probably are in a fine spot in that. So Cardinals against the Patriots, Broncos against the Colts, obvious ones. Broncos probably picked up at most spots. Is there any streaming defense that you like, either of those 4 or anyone that you've seen that's probably widely available?
I do like the Falcons. The Falcons will dial up some pressure. And again, with the quarterback situation, and I do like you think. I think it's probably going to be Desmond Ridder. The bone bruise probably keeps Aidan O'Connell out for this one. And Desmond Ridder's a turnover machine. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I would definitely, because Atlanta's desperate. Obviously, right now, they're behind in the division. This is desperation time. I think they pull out the stops defensively. Yeah, I would start them.
All right, I'm with you. Falcons is the top of my list, and I guess if the Broncos are available, I don't mind it so much against the Colts. Right. Falcons are right there, and I would play the Bengals this week, not so much the following week if you're doing one of those 2 for streamers. So like you had talked about at the top of the show, if you have a bye right now, planning your defensive streamers out, even kicker streamers if you need to, for week 16, definitely do so. And also if you have to block some folks, whether it be Patrick Taylor or some of these receivers, or getting your golden tickets like Blake Corum, Trey Benson's of the world, Ray Davis of the world off the bench, that matters too. All right, that does it for us in the Week 15 edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you, Jim, for filling in. Obviously, it was great to see you. It was great to talk to you, at least live on the YouTube channel. You and I will be back again tomorrow, at least doing the weekly rankings and daily shows on the RotoWire Fantasy Football YouTube network. And you do a fantastic work all throughout the week. We've had a few questions in the chat as well, but this is a new, at least podcast audience potentially. Where can people ask you the questions, at least for the start-sit stuff, come Sunday?
Yeah, there are a couple ways. On the X, you can always hit me up during the week at Jim Coventry NFL. I do a live start-sit stream on RotoWire Fantasy Football YouTube. I'll post the link to that show on my X later in the week. That's 11 a.m. Eastern. I give you the why, not just who to start, so you can make your best lineup decision.
There is not a harder worker in the fantasy industry than you, Jim. I know that you've been told that by a million folks. I am proud to be able to work with somebody and call somebody a friend that is as much of a grinder as you have been. So thank you for everything you've done throughout the whole week, obviously, or the whole season, I should say, and obviously this week as well, too. And hopefully a few more weeks with your lineups as well. You've been crushing the Kings Classic, one of the more relevant and known fantasy commodities out there over the past 30 years. You've been fantastic, and hoping to hear some more success, at least on the X or Twitter, from you in the weeks to come. Years to come, too, would be great. Let's hear from you as long as we can, Jim. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening.